Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be 10 things that no one tells you about childbirth. So about labour and delivery and all things to do with childbirth. That's what today's video is going to be about. So right at the start I'm going to give you a TMI warning and let you know that if you're not going to give birth, or if you haven't given birth in the past, then you probably won't want to watch this video. You won't want to know all about it because there's a lot of detail and things like that. So if you are pregnant, then I hope this video will be helpful for you when you're thinking about giving birth, and yeah, we'll give you some more information and some useful information. So if you don't know who I am, by the way, my name is Abigail. I've given birth twice. I gave birth to my second son Noah just a couple of months ago, and my first son was born a couple of years ago. And so throughout this video you're going to hear some of my experiences to do with giving birth and things that I have personally experienced and things that I didn't know before I gave birth. So let's jump straight into it. So the first thing that I didn't know about labour and delivery was that your waters break. When they break, they don't always break at the start of labour, and they don't always break in a big massive gush like you see in the films. So it's not always a very big dramatic thing. And I definitely got this wrong idea from films and TV programmes where you see inevitably, even now, you see at the start of labour, the girls or the ladies' waters break and then they rush to hospital. And to me, that's just not how birth works anyway, most of the time anyway. So I'll let you know my experience. The first time around, my experience with Samuel, I had a very long, slow labour. And so my waters kind of leaked for quite a while. They kind of came out a little bit at the start and then a little bit during, and then right at the end when I was pushing, the rest of them kind of came out in more of a gush when I was in the water bath. What's it called? The pool, the birthing pool. They came out, most of them came out right at the end when I was pushing. So that's kind of what happened with my first son. And then with my second son, it did happen a bit more dramatically Hollywood style. I had a really, really fast labour with my second son. It was just an hour or so in total, and they did break right at the start, pretty much when the contractions were happening, and it was a massive gush. So it can be like that, and it can also be much more of a leak and a very slow coming out. So I would bear that in mind. It doesn't mean you're not in labour just because your waters haven't broken in a very dramatic way. You can still be in full labour, it's still an active labour without having a really obvious water breaking situation. The second thing that I didn't know about birth, and that even the second time around I didn't know this, and it is that birth will probably be different to how you imagine it. So the first time around I really had no expectations of what birth would be like because I'd never done it before. But the second time round I did have some kind of concept of what I thought it would be like. And yeah, both times I was completely unaware of what would happen, and it happened really, really differently to how I thought it would happen both times around. So the first time around, the main thing that I didn't expect was for it to last quite so long. It lasted a really long time, and at the end I had to get an episiotomy, which I wasn't expecting either, which I'll talk about a bit later. And the second time around I had the fastest labour, so fast, an hour and a bit or so, and it was a very difficult labour with breech delivery. I'll link my birth story here if you want to check it out, by the way, because it's quite a long story. But essentially it was a breech birth, and I didn't know the baby was breech, and it was a really, really fast birth, and so I really wasn't expecting that either. So the best way to mentally prepare for birth is to expect the unexpected, basically, to have a completely open mind, to kind of have an idea of how you would like your birth to go, but be completely open for the plans to completely change. I'm definitely the kind of person that likes to be able to plan ahead and to kind of have an idea of how things are going to be, but it's really difficult to do that with birth, and you really have to just keep as much of an open mind as possible and expect things to go differently than you would expect. And I would also say that you should keep an open mind and bear in mind that you might react differently depending on your birth. So I had 2 births, like I said, I keep saying this, and I reacted very differently both times in those births. My first birth, because it was so long and slow in getting started, I was quite calm, I think. I was quite internal. I kept my emotions inside and pretty much made no noise the whole of my labour. And so that's kind of how I was the first time. And the second time I thought I would be the same, but because it was so much more dramatic and I went dilated so fast and it was more painful for me, I was literally screaming the second time around. So yeah, you might react quite differently as well depending on what your birth looks like. The third thing that no one tells you about childbirth, that no one talks about nearly enough, and it is that you are in control most of the time for most of the decisions that are being made. People just think that you have to do exactly what people say, what your doctor says, what everyone recommends. You must just do exactly what people say. And I think that you have to remember that this is your body, this is your birth. And so there will be times and situations where the doctor will do something because either you're not able to make a decision or it's life or death. But that's quite rare, I would say, that kind of situation. And generally you will have a say in how your birth is. So whether or not you want to have a mirror to look at the baby's head coming out, whether or not you want to have your clothes on or off, whether you want to be in a certain position. I know that in where I gave birth, this was all support, the right to make your own decisions was really supported. But I know in other countries around the world, in America as well, specifically I've heard about lots of horror stories about people just not realising that they have the right to make these decisions for themselves. And they don't have to do certain things, and what you want to do is make yourself as comfortable as possible for your birth, to have the closest to the birth that you would like. And so be aware that you are in control of most of the decisions most of the time. And yeah, that's something that I feel quite passionate about, because I hear all the time people saying that they don't want this to happen, they didn't want this to happen, and they didn't know they could say no to that. And you can say no to a lot of things. You don't have to have an epidural. You don't have to do a lot of the things that people think you just have to do. No, you don't. You can make that decision for yourself. It's your birth, it's your body, and it's your baby. I do want to re-emphasise, because I feel like someone might take this the wrong way. Of course, in certain situations, the doctors will do things without asking you if it's life or death, but again, it's very rare. And even when you have to go for a C-section or something, you should still be completely informed consent about everything to do with your birth. Informed consent is essential. They should ask you whether you want to have an internal exam. You don't need to have internal vaginal exams to give birth if you don't want to. You can give birth in a hospital and you can say, no, I would not like to have an internal vaginal exam. You don't need to have that. And people think these are things that you have to do and that you have to have, and you don't. So yeah, I feel passionately about that one, but that's something that I want every woman to know, that you're in control most of the time with most of the decisions. Okay, now let's talk about the mucus plug. Now, you might not even know about the mucus plug if this is your first time giving birth, but the mucus plug is essentially, it's kind of like thick and sticky. It's kind of disgusting to talk about. Well, it's not disgusting, it's natural. It's thick and it's sticky, and sometimes there's blood in it. It's kind of like really, really thick, sticky discharge. And the thing that I noticed about it that made me know it was the mucus plug is that when you do like that, it is sticky and it's like gloopy. If you want to join pregnancy groups on Facebook, you will see plenty of people posting pictures of their mucus plug, so you can see exactly what it looks like. But essentially, it's kind of, if you think about it, it's like the plug, and it comes out, and usually or often it indicates the start of labour. And so yeah, you might not have known about the mucus plug at all, so that might be something you didn't know. But also, something I didn't know was that your mucus plug can be indicating the start of labour, but actually it can also be hours or weeks before you go into labour that you lose your mucus plug, and then your mucus plug can actually grow back. So you could actually lose your mucus plug weeks before you go into labour, and it can grow back and you can like lose it all over again. So while it can indicate you're going into labour, and it's good to kind of think about the fact that you might be going into labour, it doesn't necessarily indicate that you are. And I didn't know that. That's something I learned on my last pregnancy. But I will say that for both of my pregnancies, I lost the mucus plug shortly before I went into labour. The first time I went into labour within a few hours, and the second time I went into labour very, very quickly after I lost my mucus plug. Now let's talk about contractions, which undoubtedly are the things that people worry about the most if they haven't given birth before. Contractions is scary because you don't know what they're going to feel like for you. You don't know how you're going to handle them, what you're going to be feeling like. So contractions can definitely be scary if you're thinking about giving birth for the first time. And even the second time, I was scared the second time as well, a little bit scared. But one thing I do want to say to you about contractions that I found is that yes, it is very, very painful, but the pain is bearable. So to give you a bit of background again, with my first pregnancy I had gas and air as my pain relief, and I had one morphine injection which didn't really do much. And then the second time I had just gas and air. So that was the pain relief that I had. And I will say that the pain, again, it was very, very sore, especially my second birth, which was so fast. I went from 1 centimetre to 10 centimetres within a matter of minutes, half an hour maybe, and it was very, very painful. And the first time around it was much, much more gradual, and it was also very painful. but the pain was bearable. It's not this unbearable pain that people talk about. Some people I've heard talk about it being worse than having your leg cut off or than you getting hit by a bus. And one, it's not as painful as that, I would imagine, and two, it's not the same kind of pain. It's a very intense kind of pain. I don't know how to describe it apart from a very, very strong period pain at the start, and then it gets more sore. But it's not as unbearable pain, and it's a different kind of pain than you're probably expecting as well. It's a very, very intense pain, rather than like a very just, like I could imagine having your arm cut off is not the same type of pain at all. And it's not as painful as people say, in my opinion. My pain threshold is medium to low, and it really, really wasn't that bad. So yeah, it was painful, and you kind of do forget a little bit afterwards how painful it was, but both times afterwards I have felt that it's not as bad. So I just want to reassure you, it's not as bad as you might be imagining in your head right now that it is. And another thing about contractions is that they can build up very, very slowly. My first pregnancy and birth, they started off very mild, like period pains, very, very mild period pains, and then over the next couple of days they built up very, very, very gradually, and they got very, very painful towards the end, of course. And then they can also, your contractions can come on very quickly and be very, very painful. My second pregnancy and birth, I had very mild period pains for like I wasn't even sure anything was happening. I was just like, nah, nothing's happening yet, not for a while anyway. It was just the tiniest pain. And then the hour or so before I gave birth, they got so sore. I lost my mucus plug, lost my waters, and the painful contractions just started like that. And it was very, very painful from the start. So again, your contractions can go either way. They can build up very slowly, or they can be very, very strong, very fast. And they can also slow down and stop depending on your environment. So this is often why a lot of people choose to have home births. I've not had a home birth personally, but I know a lot of people choose to have home births because the contractions can be intense and strong when you're in your own house and in your comfortable environment. Then as soon as you go to hospital, you get there, nothing's happening because you're in an unfamiliar environment. Your body's kind of gone like fight or flight. It's not focusing on the pain, the contractions and progressing your birth anymore. It's thinking about other things. So there's definitely a more scientific way to explain that, but essentially when you get to the hospital, your contractions can just slow down and stop, and that's what happened the first time with me in my first birth. So that's often why people choose to have home births, or one of the reasons anyway. And it is definitely advised that you're in the most comfortable position, most comfortable setting when you're giving birth, and you have a chance to kind of just be internal and by yourself. And that's one of the reasons why, because your contractions can slow down and stop. And I was sent home 3 times in total from the hospital last time. 2 times or 3 times? 2 or 3 times I was sent home, and it was horrible having to sit in the car in labour and being sent home twice. And yeah, it wasn't a lot of fun. So yeah, just be aware of that. The next thing I learned in my last pregnancy, and it is the meconium poo. So the meconium poo, well, the meconium is the first poo that your baby does, and it's black and sticky and horrible. So that's the first poo that your baby does. But your baby can actually poo while still inside of you when you're in labour, and it can come out during labour. So that's what happened to me in my last birth. The baby essentially did its first poo inside me, and then when I looked at my pants, there was meconium poo in them, which was very scary, and I didn't know what it was, and I was so confused. I thought I'd pooed myself, that's what I felt like, and it was a scary thing. So I will say that that's not something that happens with all births. In fact, not even most of births, I would say. It's more unusual, but it's definitely something that can happen, and that if it does happen, if you are having a home birth or something, they would advise you to go into the hospital because you need to be more monitoring, because it can affect the baby. So that's something that I didn't know, that meconium can come out during labour. Yeah, that was interesting. The next thing that you might have been worrying about as a first time mum giving birth, and that I worried about a bit the first time giving birth, was being naked in front of people and people seeing bits that you don't want them to see, and all that kind of general stuff. Especially if you're a British person, we are more modest than perhaps other cultures, and so we don't just expose everything to everyone. But what I will say is you will definitely or probably end up naked. Definitely the bottom half will end up naked, and you'll probably end up entirely naked. And you might poop on the bed. That's another thing that people get worried about, pooping when they're giving birth, in whatever position they want to give birth in. So yeah, you'll probably end up naked, you will probably poop, and you won't even care. Because that's one good thing about the pain, is the pain means that you won't care if you're pooping. And the midwives will take it away super fast. You won't see it, they won't say anything about it. They see it every day, they don't care. And similarly with seeing all your bits. Midwives don't care. They see this literally every day of their working lives, and they've seen it all before. They don't care. And so yeah, and what happens, and generally in the UK anyway, you'll only have 1 or 2 people in the room, and there'll be midwives. So I know in other countries it's different, but in the UK you'll generally only have a couple of people, and it'll be midwives. In my second birth I had lots and lots of people in the room, many people, including men, in the room. Did I care at all? Not for a second did I care, because I was in a lot of pain and I was quite worried about the baby as well. So just rest assured, you probably will be naked, you probably will poop, you won't care at all. The next thing I'm going to talk about, I think you probably will know this because a lot of people talk about it now, and I've heard a lot of people talking about it. So after you give birth, you also have to deliver the placenta. And so this is a separate kind of thing. I barely remember even delivering the placenta with my first 2, because compared to childbirth, it's nothing, it doesn't hurt at all. But basically after you give birth, they usually, if you consent, they can give you a injection which will help the placenta to come out faster. Again, refer to my earlier point, you don't have to have this injection. It's informed consent, you can choose to have it or not. And so they can give you an injection which helps the placenta to come out faster, and you have to give a couple of pushes, like pushes when you were giving birth, and the placenta will come out. And so that's a thing that happens. Some people might not know about that because people used to not talk about it that much. I feel like it's talked about quite a bit more now, so you might have known that already. But yeah, and my husband was unusually interested in what the placenta looked like. I remember looking for the first time looking at, I was holding my baby and he was fascinated with his placenta, and I was like, why? What is wrong with you? So yeah, I don't think most men would be like that, but yes, so it's a thing, and it comes out and it's large, and yeah, but the pain of that coming out is nothing compared to the pain of childbirth. So it's not something to be worried about, it's just something to be aware of. And the last thing I want to talk about is an episiotomy. So if you don't know what an episiotomy is, I feel like I talk about it quite a lot on this channel, but if you're new, an episiotomy is where they take essentially scissors, surgical scissors, and they cut you from your vaginal opening, and they cut. And the reason they do this is usually because they need the baby's head to come out, and it's not coming out. And there can be a few different reasons for this. For me, I've had an episiotomy twice now for both my births. My first birth, I had an episiotomy because I was pushing for hours and hours and hours, and it just wasn't coming out. It wasn't getting big enough, or I don't know what, and I was getting exhausted towards the end. So eventually they had to kind of push the baby's head back in and go cut. And then there's a bigger opening. It's a very simple way it works. There's a bigger opening and the baby comes out. And so I would say that that's something that people can get. You don't, again, refer to my earlier point, you don't have to get one. You can choose not to, unless your baby's in distress, you can refuse to have one. So with my first birth, my baby wasn't in distress, he was completely fine, but it was getting to the point where I just couldn't continue because I was so exhausted. So I agreed to have an episiotomy, and the baby came out straight away after that. And so for me it was a very big relief and a big blessing. So that happened the first time, and then the second time around they basically had to, I think the main reason they had to have the episiotomy was they needed the baby out fast, because this baby, my second baby, was in distress and was in danger, and so they had to get the opening very big very fast and get it out. And also breech is slightly more awkward to deliver. So that to say, episiotomies do happen. You always have to have one if they suggest one. And yeah, what it is essentially a big massive pair of scissors, and they cut. They do numb first, so they give you an injection which numbs the area, then they cut, then you have your baby, then they either give you the baby and then they take it away for a while, and they take you away and they stitch you all up nicely. And that's what it is. So you can tear, or an alternative to that sometimes can be to have an episiotomy, to have yourself cut. And it is sore. The recovery is painful. I don't know if it's more painful or less painful than recovery with just a tear. I don't know, because I've only had episiotomies. The recovery is painful and it can be long, and the scar tissue can hurt for quite a while. That's my experience. But it can be necessary, or it can be a good alternative at certain points in your birth. So that's something to be aware of. You might not know that that's a thing. That is a thing. Personally, I think it's preferable to having forceps or some other kind of delivery, because the episiotomy, generally, there's no reason that would hurt the baby, because it's just cutting you. So I find that something preferable to having a different kind of assisted delivery. So yeah, that's an episiotomy. They cut you. It's not fun afterwards, but during, it's not that bad. Just to be aware of that. But it should always be with informed consent that you get these things. And so that's everything that I want to talk about today. There are definitely other things that I could include here. So if you have any questions, just leave a comment down below. But those are things I'm going to cover today, and those are the main things that I think I didn't know before I gave birth. And so I hope this was helpful for you, interesting for you. If you've already given birth and you would like to add something, please leave a comment down below and let me know what you would add to things that no one tells you about childbirth. And I'll see you very soon in my next one. Bye guys.